Awesome. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is use of primary sources. So as I said, primary sources are really where you want most of your research to lie and what you're using to really create your project. Because primary source interpretation is really the backbone of a successful NHD project. But sometimes it can be kind of tricky to know what is a true primary source. And so that's one thing that you can, all of us could work on for improving our projects is as you go forward to the national level competition is to go back through your bibliography and really look at your sources, look at your annotations, and to consider, okay, is this really a primary source, like in the way I'm using it? So I have an example for y'all. So you can see a photograph there. So I'm on the left with the big sunglasses. And then on the right is Ashlyn Malone, who is also a participant here today. And a few years back, Ashlyn and I were lucky enough to work with National History Day, and we were part of their Sacrifice for Freedom Normandy Scholars Institute. So we were able to spend a lot of time learning about D-Day. And this is actually a photograph of Ashlyn and I on Omaha Beach in France. So here's my question. If you were doing a project on D-Day, could you interview me and have that interview be a primary source? So I'll let you guys answer in the chat box. So if your project is on D-Day, could you interview me and have that be a primary source?
We've got kind of a mixed bag. We've got some folks saying yes, several no's now.
Yeah, and so this is what can be a challenge sometimes in figuring this out. So if you want to ask me a question about, for example, you know, what kind of artillery was being used on the beach in 1941, I might be able to answer that question. Not 1941, 1944. I might be able to answer that question, but that would not be a primary source because I was not part of D-Day, right? I was not standing on that beach in 1944. So really sometimes that can be tricky with like interviews, especially if you're talking to an expert. Even though they may be the expert, they're really not a primary source. So that's really something to think about. And if you have questions about that, you know, ask your teacher, your educator. And sometimes we don't know that either. I mean, there are stuff that comes up all the time where like I have to discuss it with my students and we will, you know, email Miss Oakley, or in the past we talked to Jennifer Core. So Nikki would definitely be happy to help you if you have questions about sort of exactly where something fits. So definitely you want to be looking at primary sources, but also just really thinking about for your project, is it a primary source or not? And I would also say, depending on your topics, if your topic is something that happened before about 1600, it can be a challenge to find good primary sources. And also if your topic is something that happened outside of the US, sometimes that can be a challenge. So if you're having trouble finding good primary sources, again, I would encourage you to reach out and see if other people kind of can help you out with that.
Okay. So let me just add something on with primary sources. So back in the day, I used to use kind of challenge folks to say, would Judge Judy accept your piece of evidence, your primary source, as evidence in her classroom? Now, I don't know how many people watch Judge Judy anymore, but you know, it's kind of like, it's really, what evidence does this bear on your question? So think about your question first. Think about your argument. Which of the sources gives original evidence? Somebody that saw it, witnessed it, can actually give you firsthand evidential, you know, input. What would be acceptable in the court of law? So, or in the court of history law. So think of it that way. And it's a process, because some pieces of evidence can be primary in some cases and not primary in others. And it all depends on the question that's being asked, the argument that's being made, isn't primary source evidence for that.